Hey, what's up? It's Todd from Todd v Dating, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how one simple lesson from finance and game theory can dramatically improve your success in dating, relationships, and sex. So let's find that out right now. So I'm about to explain a concept from finance and math, but before you tune out, imagine girls in bikinis and imagine deep, loving, fulfilling relationships, because that's what you're going to get from listening to this. So pay attention and keep your eyes on the prize. All right, so the concept I want to introduce you to is something called the efficient frontier, which sounds complicated, but it's actually quite simple. Here's the basic idea. If you sit with your money in your pocket, you don't invest it, there's no risk, but there's also no return. As you take more risk, the only reason you would take that risk in investing would be because you expect to be compensated by a higher return. You wouldn't take a greater risk of losing your money unless you also got a higher return. So it stands to reason that as risk goes up, return also goes up. Actually, the graph would be this way for you guys, risk to return. All right, so what happens though? There's a variety of different investments you could choose for any particular expected return. For a 5% return, there's a whole bunch of different things you could try. 10% return, a whole bunch of different things you could try. But you want the one of those 10% options or 5% options that does that with the least risk. And there's essentially a line on the graph of all investments possible that we call the efficient frontier, and that's for every expected return, what is the least risky option? And you would only ever want to invest in something that's on the efficient frontier. So that's the idea in finance. But in game, there's also such a thing as being efficient or inefficient, right? There are some moves you can do that just have a higher likely return for the same level of risk than others, and doing the one that has a high level of risk for a very low level of reward is inherently foolish. And the chances are you are doing these high risk, low reward moves. Almost every guy is. So I'm going to show you several things you're probably doing in your own game where you're risking rejection, failure, and blowout and achieving very, very little in the process. One of the most common inefficiency mistakes that I see guys make in their dating lives is trying to escalate on the way to an instant date or escalate on the way to a pull. So put yourself in this situation. You've been talking to a girl, it's going really well, it's been flirty enough, the vibe's there, there's premise established, and she's agreed to go with you to the next venue. That's awesome. You're in a winning position, and once you get to the next venue, a lot of good things can happen. In fact, that's why you decided to go to the next venue in the first place, is because wherever you were before, you probably couldn't escalate in the right way anymore, and you needed to go to another venue. So the goal is just get there, because once you're there, everything gets easier. The environment's more intimate. It's easier to escalate. All kinds of things. But if you try and escalate on the way to the instant date, you might blow the entire instant date. Put it this way. You have this 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes delay between, leaving one place and going to the other. That's a very short period of time, and if you mess something up there, it's very tenuous. You're walking a tightrope. She might be nervous about going to the place, etc. You're likely to get a rejection, or more likely than usual. Once you get to the place and settle in, she's basically committed to being there for a serious period of time, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour, so you have a lot more leeway, a lot more margin for error. So rather than escalating on the way to the instant date, why not just get there and then escalate when you're there? So this is what we call a dominated strategy. Escalating on the way to the instant date is dominated by escalating once you are there. You achieve nothing by escalating on the way there, or at least nothing significant that you wouldn't achieve by waiting and getting there, and yet you risk tons of possible failure, tons of things going wrong completely unnecessarily. There's nothing gained by this action over this action, but there's plenty lost, and so this action is inherently foolish if you know this other action instead. The next incredibly common mistake is actually related to the previous one, but it's distinct enough and common enough I think it deserves its own mention, and this is sexting heavily before going on a date, okay? Why do you not want to do this? Well, the point is that sexting is a risk, right? You might turn the girl off, you might be too sexual, you might freak her out, you might sext wrong in some way and mess things up. It's a high-risk strategy. But also, in order to do it, you need a lot of buy-in. In order for it to have a chance of working, you need the girl bought in enough to participate and sext you back. However, if that happens, you're still far away from her, right? You're not in the same place. There's nothing that's actually going to happen. Whereas if you use that same amount of buy-in to actually go on a date, things can actually happen. So between sexting with the social capital you've created versus taking the girl on a date with that same amount of social capital, there is no real efficient reason to sext rather than going on a date. Now, obviously, if the girl's massively initiating sexting and it would be weird for you not to participate a little bit, that may be different. But I'm talking about taking a risk, initiating sexting, or heavily escalating the sexting that occurs. That is a highly inefficient strategy when you relate it to just getting the girl on a date. Because the last time I checked, you can't send your dick over the phone in ones and zeros, but you can have sex when she's actually there live. This next one may surprise you because you've probably been doing it wrong for years, and you've probably also seen it wrong in every single Hollywood movie ever that has a romance or sex scene, okay? And what is this? It's taking the bra off too early in the escalation sequence to sex. So think of it this way. Every move that goes towards sex, it has kind of two elements to it. One is how arousing is it? How much does it turn someone on? The other element is how much does it telegraph sex? How much does it telegraph that this is like, oh shit, sex might happen now. Oh shit, this is getting real, this is getting serious. The more an action telegraphs sex, the more likely the girl is to resist it. The more arousing it is, the more likely she is to go along with it. So the perfect actions are those which are highly arousing, but don't telegraph sex very much, especially towards the beginning of the escalation. And if you think about taking off the bra does not actually arouse. There is no erogenous zone being titillated by this. There is not a lot of like intimate contact being, initiated by it, etc., etc. In fact, for some girls, it may make them nervous and insecure, even if they have a good body. So it has its issues. Compare that to something like kissing a girl's neck, pulling her hair, things like rubbing her thigh, something like that, which are far more arousing. They actually create a physical sensation that's sexual in the girl's body, but they don't scream sex quite as much. In fact, in general, moves where you are taking off clothes or taking off her clothes should be put kind of later in the sexual escalation versus moves where you are being arousing while leaving the clothes on. You can even consider some moves, such as, like, for example, if you want to stimulate the nipple, you could pull the bra down, kiss or lick it, and then even put the bra back on. That oftentimes is an even better move than taking the bra off. And if you've already done it once, taking it down, you have permission to take it off at a later time whenever you would like. So again, taking the bra off versus that move, or versus moves like biting or kissing the neck or other sexual moves that are more titillating and more arousing, it's certainly less efficient to do taking the bra off. This next one is something you probably already know is bad in game, but you might not have understood exactly why or understood just how bad it actually is. And this is bringing up controversial topics like religion or politics early on in a conversation. So there is potentially some benefit to this, just like other things in this list, where it does achieve something, it just achieves it in an inefficient way. So what do these things potentially achieve? Well, one, it achieves you taking a stance and being polarizing, possibly. And if you happen to get lucky and there's a commonality, that might work in your favor. However, here's the problem. It's way too risky. See, if you take a strong political stance and they happen to be opposite you, it's going to be an immediate deal breaker. It's going to immediately kill any sexual tension, any man to woman vibe. It's going to become the dominant topic of a conversation, especially in the current day and age. So it's a very risky thing to do for very little reward when you could achieve that same amount of commonality over both going to the gym or both playing sports or something that's not particularly controversial in the same way. So why would you take that risk? And a note on this, even if they've already brought up the topic and you think you're similar to them on it, you may be wrong. In fact, many of the greatest religious wars in history were fought by different factions of the same religious creed. So be very, very careful. It is a minefield out there.
There are those who are called to be a child of God. There are those who know their God.
This final mistake is one that it's shocking to me that guys do it, but apparently a lot of guys do because I hear questions about it all the time. And that is trying to define the nature of the relationship before having sex. In particular, what I hear is trying to bring up the fact that you're going to be seeing other people before having sex. That is just ridiculous. Here's the thing. As a man, up until the point when you actually have sex, the implied dynamic is that you are probably the one who is chasing sex and she's the one deciding. Whether or not that's the case in your set, because hopefully you're getting her to chase and you're not being that needy, but regardless, that's the implied dynamic. After sex, the dynamic shifts from, instead of, is it going to happen, are you going to stay around after? right? So once that dynamic has shifted, you have dramatically more power in the relationship and you're in a much better negotiating position. So why on earth would you try and negotiate from a much weaker negotiating position pre-sex instead of negotiating from a much more powerful position after sex? And this is true for any defining the relationship conversation. It's especially true if you want to talk about the fact that you're seeing other girls and bringing that up before sex, because that's particularly high risk. That's particularly likely to mess everything up. But it's true for any defining the relationship situation. Why would you want to negotiate from a position of very little negotiating power when very soon you're going to be in a position with much more bargaining power and much more say in how things turn out? It just makes sense. So wait, be patient, that time will come. Get to the sex first, get to having a relationship, and then you can deal with what the relationship is once that's in place. So those are just a few examples of cases where it's possible to achieve a result with a lot of risk or a little bit of risk. And clearly, if you can get a result without risking rejection or failure, why wouldn't you? So I encourage you to think a bit about your game, try and be more efficient. You're gonna get better results, more consistent results, more sex, more relationships, more girlfriends, all of that if you just understand this concept of being a little more efficient in your game.